Deep in space, a golden empire was searching. A mother was looking for her lost child, and she was ready to burn a planet to find him. Arthur thought he had just found a stray cat. He didn't know he was holding a creature that could destroy stars, but the hunters had arrived. They didn't care about humans. They only wanted the prize. They expected Arthur to run. Instead, they found a human who was willing to fight monsters with a frying pan that he risked everything to keep his small friend safe. He became a human shield against an alien army, and then, the sky opened up. The universe was about to learn why you should never mess with a human and his cat. Deep in the dark space behind the moon, a giant golden ship waited in silence. This ship was so big that it looked like a floating city made of gold and fire. Inside the ship, the air was heavy and hot. The dragon queen, Zalara, stood on the bridge. Her eyes were like burning suns, and her long tail hit the floor with a sound like thunder. She was not just angry, she was terrified. Her only child, the prince of the Dragon Empire, was missing. He was a tiny hatchling, only a few weeks old, and he had accidentally fallen through a portal during a space storm. That portal had dropped him on a small, primitive planet called Earth. The queen looked at the blue planet below and roared. Her voice made the metal walls of the ship shake. She gave a simple order to her generals: find her son. If a single hair on his head was hurt, she would turn the entire planet into a ball of smoke and ash. Far below, in a crowded city on Earth, a man named Arthur was living a very quiet life. Arthur was a lonely office worker who lived in a small apartment on the 4th floor. He didn't have many friends, and his life was the same every day. He went to work, came home, and sat on his small balcony to watch the sunset. But 1 week ago, something changed. A small, black creature had appeared on his balcony. Arthur thought it was a stray cat. It was small, fluffy, and had deep black fur. But this cat was different. Its eyes were not green or yellow, they were a bright, shining gold. Sometimes, when Arthur looked closely, he thought he saw tiny, hard scales hidden deep under the fur. But Arthur just smiled and thought it was a strange, beautiful breed of cat he had never seen before. Arthur felt sorry for the little guy. He started buying the most expensive tuna he could find at the grocery store. Every evening at 6 p.m., Arthur would walk out onto the balcony and put a silver bowl of tuna on the floor. "Here you go, little one," Arthur would say in a kind, soft voice. The cat would walk toward him with a royal grace that no normal animal had. It didn't meow, it made a deep, vibrating sound in its chest that felt like a tiny engine. Arthur called him Shadow. He would sit next to Shadow and tell him about his day. He didn't know that the little hatchling was actually listening and understanding every word. The Prince of Dragons, who could destroy a city when fully grown, was currently licking tuna off his paws and enjoying the company of a kind human. While Arthur slept peacefully at night, Shadow stayed awake to watch over his new friend. The apartment was often cold because the heater was old. One night, Shadow saw Arthur shivering under his blanket. The little dragon walked to the foot of the bed and took a deep breath. He didn't breathe out a big fire, but he released a tiny, soft puff of blue flame. This flame didn't burn anything, it just filled the room with a perfect, gentle warmth. Shadow purred, his golden eyes glowing in the dark. He liked this human. Arthur was the only creature who had ever been kind to him without being afraid of him. To Arthur, he wasn't a powerful prince, he was just a friend who needed a meal. However, outside the apartment, the world was becoming a dangerous place. Secret alien drones, invisible to human radar, were flying between the tall buildings. The Dragon Queen's special agents were moving through the streets. They were elite warriors who could kill in a second, but they were currently shaking with fear. They knew the prince's power. A dragon hatchling is like a living bomb. If the prince got scared or felt a lot of pain, his body would release a star burst, a massive explosion of energy that could burn the entire continent. The agents had to find him before a human accidentally scared him or a stray dog barked at him. They were scanning every house, every alley, and every balcony, moving closer and closer to Arthur's street. The tension in the city was growing, even if the humans didn't know why. People felt a strange heat in the air, and the birds had stopped singing. Arthur noticed that the cat was acting a bit strange, too. Shadow would often stare at the sky and growl at the clouds. Arthur would just pet his head and say, "Don't worry, Shadow. It's just a storm coming." He had no idea that the storm was actually a fleet of thousands of golden warships hidden just behind the clouds. Arthur felt a deep need to protect this little creature. He didn't have much in life, but he promised himself that as long as Shadow was on his balcony, the little cat would be safe and fed. Suddenly, the evening sky changed. It wasn't the slow change of a sunset. The blue sky ripped open, and the clouds turned a bright, glowing gold. The air became so hot that people ran inside their houses. Massive shadows began to cover the city as the Dragon Queen's fleet finally entered the Earth's atmosphere. Giant ships, some miles long, hovered over the skyscrapers. The world went into a total panic. Sirens started screaming, and people were crying in the streets. Arthur stood on his balcony, his heart racing. He looked up at the giant golden ships and then looked down at the small black cat at his feet. Shadow stood up, his fur standing on end. His golden eyes were now glowing like two bright stars. Arthur didn't run away. Instead, he stepped forward and picked up the little cat, holding him tight against his chest. He thought the aliens were coming to hurt the animals or the people. "It's okay, Shadow," Arthur whispered, even though his own hands were shaking. "I've got you. I won't let them take you." He stood there, a simple man with a frying pan in his hand and a cat in his arms, ready to fight the entire universe to protect his small friend. He didn't know that the Queen was looking directly at his balcony, and the fate of the Earth was now resting in his hands. High above the city, inside the command center of the golden flagship, the Dragon Queen Zalara sat on her throne. She was surrounded by thousands of floating screens. Every screen showed a different part of the city below. Her soldiers were scanning every heartbeat, every heat signature, and every movement on Earth. Finally, her lead commander pointed to a small, flickering light on a screen. "We have found the prince, my queen," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He is on a small stone platform attached to a human dwelling. But there is a problem. A primitive biological life form, a human, is holding him." The Queen's eyes narrowed as the screen zoomed in. She saw Arthur's small, messy apartment. She saw the peeling paint on the walls and the old, flickering light bulbs. She saw Arthur sitting on his balcony, his clothes worn out and his face tired from a long day of work. To a powerful dragon like Zalara, Arthur looked like an ant, tiny, weak, and unimportant. She raised her hand, ready to give the order to vaporize the building and take her son back. But then, she stopped. She watched as Arthur opened a small can of premium tuna. She noticed that Arthur's own plate was nearly empty. He was only eating a small piece of dry bread, yet he gave the expensive meat to the cat. This confused the Queen. In the Dragon Empire, the strong took everything, and the weak got nothing. But here was a creature who had almost nothing, yet he was giving his best to a small animal. She watched Arthur reach out his hand. Her heart stopped. If this human tried to hurt her son, she would burn the city in a heartbeat. But Arthur didn't hit or grab the hatchling. He gently scratched Shadow behind the ears. Shadow, the prince who was born to rule the stars, tilted his head and closed his eyes in pure happiness. He let out a purr that was so deep it caused a small vibration in the Queen's sensors. Zalara felt a strange emotion. This human wasn't a captor, he was a guardian. She decided to wait and watch, curious to see what this weak human would do next, but the Queen wasn't the only one watching. In the dark alleys below Arthur's apartment, 3 shadows moved silently. They were not dragons, and they were certainly not humans. They were the Solari, a group of dangerous intergalactic mercenaries. They were tall, thin creatures with pale blue skin and 4 glowing eyes. They had been tracking the prince's energy signal for days. To them, the Dragon Prince was not a living being, he was a prize. If they could kidnap the hatchling, they could sell him for enough money to buy an entire galaxy, or use him as a weapon against the Dragon Queen. They didn't care about the humans or the city. They only cared about the gold. The Solari leader pulled out a long, metallic device. It was a stealth dampener. It created a bubble of darkness that blocked the Dragon Queen's scanners from seeing them. On the flagship, Zalara suddenly saw the screen showing Arthur's balcony turn into static. She stood up, her wings unfolding with a loud snap. "Something is wrong," she hissed. "My son's signal is being blocked. Send the strike teams. Now." But space was far, and the mercenaries were already at Arthur's building. They began to climb the walls like giant spiders, their long claws digging into the bricks. Back on the balcony, Arthur felt a sudden chill in the air. The city was usually noisy, but now it was deathly silent. Even the sirens in the distance seemed to have stopped. Shadow stood up on the balcony railing, his fur bristling. His golden eyes were fixed on the edge of the roof above them. He let out a low, dangerous growl, a sound that no house cat should ever be able to make. Arthur looked at him, worried. "What is it, Shadow? Is there a bird up there?" Arthur leaned over the railing to look, but he saw something much worse. He saw a blue, four-eyed face staring back at him from the shadows. One of the Solari jumped down onto the balcony. The impact made the floor shake. Arthur fell back in shock, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never seen anything like this. The creature was 7 feet tall and carried a glowing electric net. Behind it, 2 more mercenaries landed. They ignored Arthur completely, their eyes locked on the small black cat. "There you are, little dragon," the leader hissed in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. "Come with us, and maybe we won't kill this pathetic human." Shadow didn't run. He stepped in front of Arthur, his small body shaking with rage. Tiny sparks of blue electricity began to jump between his scales. But he was just a hatchling, he didn't have his full power yet. He was too small to fight 3 grown warriors. The lead mercenary laughed and raised the net. "Don't fight it, little prince. You are coming with." Before the alien could finish, a heavy iron frying pan smashed into the side of its head with a loud clang. The mercenary stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. Arthur was standing there, his face pale and his legs shaking, but he was holding the frying pan like a sword. He had jumped up and stepped in front of Shadow. "I don't know what you are," Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with fear, "but you aren't touching my cat. Get off my balcony right now." The Solari looked at each other and began to laugh. A tiny human was trying to fight them with a kitchen tool. They didn't realize that they weren't just facing a human, they were facing the most dangerous thing in the universe, a human protecting someone he loved. The Solari leader slowly turned his head back toward Arthur. The spot where the frying pan had hit him was glowing with a faint purple bruise, but he didn't look hurt, he looked insulted. In all his years of hunting rare creatures across the stars, no one had ever dared to hit him with a piece of kitchen equipment. The other 2 mercenaries stopped laughing. The air on the small balcony became heavy and cold. "You dare touch me, monkey," the leader hissed, his 4 eyes glowing with a hateful light. He reached out a long, clawed hand to grab Arthur's throat, but Shadow wasn't going to let that happen. The little black cat suddenly jumped from the floor onto Arthur's shoulder. His small mouth opened, and instead of a meow, a sound like a cracking mountain came out. A small spark of blue fire danced between his tiny teeth. The mercenaries froze. They knew that if the prince released his full energy, the entire city block would vanish, and they would die along with it. "Wait," the leader shouted to his team. "Don't fire your weapons. If the hatchling gets too scared, he will explode. We have to take him quietly." This gave Arthur a small window of time. He didn't understand what hatchling meant, but he saw that these monsters were suddenly afraid of his cat. Arthur didn't waste a second. He knew he couldn't win a fistfight against 3 giants, so he acted fast. He reached back into his kitchen through the open balcony door and grabbed a large fire extinguisher. The mercenaries were confused. They had high-tech laser shields and armor that could stop bullets, but they had never seen a human fire extinguisher. Arthur pulled the pin and squeezed the handle with all his might. A massive cloud of white, freezing powder exploded into the faces of the Solari. The mercenaries screamed in surprise. Their 4 eyes were very sensitive to light and dust, and the white powder blinded them instantly. "Run, Shadow!" Arthur yelled. He grabbed the little cat and tucked him inside his thick winter jacket, zipping it up so only the cat's golden eyes were peeking out. Arthur didn't run toward the front door, he knew they would be waiting for him in the hallway. Instead, he did something crazy. He grabbed a heavy rope he used for drying clothes, tied it to the balcony railing, and swung himself over the edge. He was just a regular office worker, and his hands burned as he slid down the rope to the third-floor balcony below. He crashed onto the neighbors' chairs, gasping for breath, but he didn't stop. He had to keep moving. Up on the 4th floor, the Solari leader wiped the white powder from his eyes and roared in fury. He looked down and saw Arthur running through the narrow alleyway behind the building. "Get him," the leader commanded. The mercenaries didn't use ropes. They simply jumped from the 4th floor, landing on the pavement with a loud thud that cracked the concrete. They moved with unnatural speed, their long legs covering distance much faster than Arthur could run. Arthur could hear their heavy footsteps getting closer and closer. He ducked behind a row of large trash bins, his heart thumping like a drum in his chest. Inside Arthur's jacket, Shadow was vibrating. The little dragon could feel Arthur's fear, but he also felt the man's warmth and the steady beat of his heart. Every other creature in the universe looked at the prince with either fear or greed. But this human was different. Arthur was risking his life, jumping off buildings and fighting monsters, just to keep him safe. Shadow felt a surge of power in his blood. He wanted to grow to his full size and burn these hunters into dust, but he knew his young body couldn't handle that much energy yet. He stayed quiet, pressing his small head against Arthur's chest, choosing to trust the human. The mercenaries caught up to Arthur at the end of the dark alley. The exit was blocked by a tall metal fence. Arthur turned around, his back against the cold metal. He held his frying pan in one hand and a heavy rock in the other. He was exhausted, his hands were bleeding, and he was cornered. The 3 Solari walked toward him slowly, enjoying his fear. The leader pulled out a small, triangular device, a stun prod. "Give us the creature, human," the leader said, "and I will make your death quick. If you don't, I will spend the next week peeling the skin off your bones." Arthur looked at the monsters and then looked down at the little golden eyes looking up at him from his jacket. He felt a strange sense of calm. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a soldier. He was just a guy who liked his cat. "I already told you," Arthur said, his voice steady now. "You aren't taking him." He threw the rock with all his strength, hitting the leader right in the middle of his forehead. It didn't do much damage, but it was the ultimate act of defiance. The leader growled and lunged forward, his stun prod glowing with a dangerous blue light. Just as the weapon was about to hit Arthur, the sky above them didn't just glow, it screamed. A beam of pure golden light shot down from the clouds, hitting the ground between Arthur and the mercenaries. The force of the impact sent the Solari flying back against the brick walls. The air smelled like ozone and burnt metal. A tall, beautiful woman with skin like polished gold and eyes like sun stepped out of the light. She was wearing armor that looked like it was made of stars. It was the Dragon Queen. She looked at the mercenaries with pure hatred, but then she turned her gaze toward Arthur, who was still shielding his jacket with his arms. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing Arthur had ever experienced. The Dragon Queen, Zalara, stood in the center of the dark alley, her presence filling the space with a warm, golden light. She was much taller than a human, and her skin shimmered like millions of tiny diamonds. Her eyes were not human, they were vertical slits of pure fire that seemed to look through Arthur's very soul. The 3 Solari mercenaries were slowly crawling away, their armor cracked and smoking from the Queen's landing. Arthur's heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. He looked at this beautiful, terrifying woman and then at the small cat hiding in his jacket. To Arthur, she wasn't a mother coming for her child, she looked like the most powerful alien hunter of them all. He gripped his frying pan tighter, his knuckles turning white. Zalara took a step forward, her golden boots clinking on the pavement. "Human," she said, her voice sounding like 1,000 bells ringing at once. It was beautiful, but it carried a power that made Arthur's knees want to buckle. "You are holding something that does not belong to you. That creature is the Prince of the Dragon Empire. He is my flesh and blood. Hand him to me now, and I might let you live." She reached out a long, graceful hand. Her expression was cold and hard. She expected this small, weak human to drop the cat and run away in fear. In her world, no one ever said no to the Queen. But Arthur did something that shocked her. He didn't move. He actually stepped back, pulling the jacket tighter around Shadow. "I don't care if you're a queen or an alien from the stars," Arthur said, his voice trembling but loud. "This little guy was hungry and cold. I've been taking care of him. I saw those other monsters try to hurt him, and I won't let you just take him away to some laboratory or a cage. He stays with me until I know he's safe." Arthur was terrified, but his love for the cat was stronger than his fear of the glowing woman. Shadow, inside the jacket, let out a soft chirping sound and licked Arthur's hand, feeling the man's bravery. The Queen's eyes widened. She was a being who could destroy planets, yet this human, who was covered in dirt and blood, was standing his ground against her. Before she could speak again, a loud, high-pitched whistling sound filled the alley. The Solari mercenaries had recovered, and they were desperate. They knew they couldn't beat the Queen in a fair fight, so they used their most illegal weapon, a gravity leech. One of the mercenaries threw a small, black ball that stuck to the Queen's golden chest. Suddenly, a massive purple bubble of energy surrounded her, pinning her arms to her sides and pulling her toward the ground. The Queen roared in anger, but the leech was designed to drain the power of dragons. She was temporarily trapped. "Now," the Solari leader shouted. He didn't go for the Queen, he went for the easiest target. He pulled out a long, jagged, sonic spear and aimed it directly at Arthur's chest. The spear was designed to send a wave of sound that could shatter bones and kill anything in its path. The mercenary fired the weapon. An invisible wave of distorted air raced toward Arthur and the hatchling. The Queen watched in horror. If that wave hit her son, the shock would cause the prince to lose control of his inner fire and explode, killing everyone in the city. "No," she screamed, struggling against the gravity trap. Arthur didn't know what the weapon was, but he saw the air rippling like heat on a summer day. He knew it was dangerous. In that split second, Arthur didn't think about his own life. He turned his back to the weapon and curled his body into a ball, completely covering the cat with his own chest and arms. He became a human shield. The sonic wave hit Arthur's back with the force of a speeding truck. He felt his ribs crack, and the world went white with pain. He was thrown forward, smashing into the brick wall, but he never let go of the cat. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air, his vision fading. The alley went silent. The Solari laughed, thinking they had won. But then, something shifted in the air. The gravity leech on the Queen's chest began to melt. Her anger had reached a level that even the trap couldn't hold. She watched the human lying on the ground, bleeding and broken, still holding her son. The prince crawled out of Arthur's jacket, his golden eyes filled with tears. He nudged Arthur's face with his nose, making a sad, crying sound. The Queen realized that Arthur had just taken a deadly hit intended for her child. A human, a primitive, weak human, had sacrificed himself for a dragon. The Queen's golden skin began to turn a deep, angry red. The ground beneath her feet turned into liquid lava. She broke free from the gravity bubble with a scream that shattered every window in the neighborhood. She looked at the mercenaries, and for the first time in their lives, they felt true, ultimate terror. "You touched the human who protected my son," she hissed, her voice now a deep growl. "For that, there is no mercy." The suspense reached a breaking point as the queen raised her hands, and the entire alley was swallowed by a blinding, golden light. The golden light that exploded from the queen was so bright that it felt like a second sun had been born inside the narrow alley. The Solari mercenaries didn't even have time to scream. In 1 second, they were standing there with their weapons, in the next, they were nothing but piles of grey ash blowing in the wind. Their armor, their ships, and their greed were gone, erased by the queen's absolute power. But as soon as the enemies were gone, the red glow on the queen's skin faded back to a soft, warm gold. The fierce warrior disappeared, and a worried mother took her place. She rushed toward the corner where Arthur lay still on the cold ground. Arthur was struggling to breathe. The sonic wave had been like a massive hammer hitting his back. His vision was blurry, and everything felt like it was underwater. He could feel something small and warm moving near his face. It was Shadow. The little cat was licking the blood off Arthur's forehead, making a high-pitched crying sound that broke the queen's heart. Arthur's hand, shaking and covered in dust, slowly reached up. He didn't try to save himself. Instead, he weakly pushed the cat toward the glowing woman. "Take him," Arthur whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Keep him safe. Don't let the monsters get him." Even at the edge of death, Arthur's only thought was the safety of his small friend. The dragon queen, Zalara, stopped. She looked at this human in total silence. She had lived for thousands of years and had seen many civilizations, but she had never seen anything like this. This human had no magic, no scales, and no fire. He was made of soft skin and brittle bones. Yet, he had used his own body to stop a weapon that would have killed a prince. She knelt down in the dirt of the alley, her royal golden dress getting stained, but she didn't care. She reached out and touched Arthur's chest. A cooling wave of blue energy flowed from her fingers into Arthur's body. The pain in his ribs vanished, his lungs filled with air, and his eyes cleared. She wasn't just a destroyer, she was a healer of her people. As Arthur's strength returned, he sat up and gasped. He looked at his hands, then at the queen, and finally at the cat. What is happening?" he asked, his mind spinning. Shadow jumped out of Arthur's lap and stood between him and the queen. Right before Arthur's eyes, the cat began to change. The black fur melted away, revealing shimmering obsidian scales. 2 small, elegant horns grew from his head, and a pair of leathery wings unfolded from his back. The purr turned into a tiny, royal roar. Shadow was no longer a cat, he was a beautiful, miniature dragon. Arthur's mouth fell open. He had been feeding a dragon prince tuna for a week. The queen looked at Arthur, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a scary smile, it was one of deep respect. "You call him Shadow," she said softly. "His name is Prince Ignis. He is the future of the Dragon Empire. We thought humans were a violent, primitive race. We were wrong. We found the greatest treasure in the galaxy in the heart of a simple man." She stood up and offered her hand to Arthur, helping him stand. As he rose, Arthur looked up at the sky and saw that the clouds had completely vanished. Thousands of golden ships were now visible, hanging over the city like stars. The entire world was watching this alley through satellite cameras and telescopes. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of 1,000 dragon wings flapping in the upper atmosphere. The queen turned toward the city and raised her hand. Her voice projected across the entire planet, speaking into the minds of every human on Earth. "People of Earth," she announced. "Your world was almost destroyed today because of the shadows of our enemies. But it was saved by one of your own. Because of the kindness of this man, Arthur, your planet is no longer just a blue rock in space. From this day forward, Earth is a brother world to the Dragon Empire. Anyone who attacks a human attacks a dragon. Arthur stood there, his old frying pan still lying in the dirt next to him, feeling very small but very proud. He looked down at the little dragon, Ignis, who was now rubbing his scaly head against Arthur's leg, just like he did when he was a cat. Arthur realized his quiet, lonely life was over forever. He wasn't just an office worker anymore, he was the man who had befriended the stars. But even with all the golden ships and the powerful queen, Arthur only had one question. He looked at the queen and asked, does he still like tuna? The queen laughed, a sound like beautiful music, and the little dragon chirped happily. 1 year had passed since the night the sky turned to gold. Earth was no longer a lonely, quiet planet. Now, giant crystal towers rose alongside human skyscrapers, and the sky was often filled with the elegant shapes of dragons flying alongside human aircraft. The world had changed forever, but in the heart of the capital city, a special building stood, the Embassy of Humanity. At the very top of this building was a balcony that looked exactly like Arthur's old apartment. Arthur sat there, wearing a fine suit instead of his old office clothes, but he still looked like the same kind man. He was now the Grand Ambassador of Earth, the bridge between two very different worlds. However, the galaxy was not entirely at peace. While the dragons loved humans, other alien races were jealous and suspicious. A group known as the Galactic Council, a collection of cold, logical alien species, could not understand why the powerful dragon queen would waste her time with weak humans. They decided to send a massive fleet to Earth to challenge the alliance. They arrived with thousands of silver ships, blocking out the sun. Their leader, a cold being made of living stone named Crawl, descended to Arthur's balcony. He didn't come to talk, he came to show strength. Crawl looked at Arthur with disgust, his many eyes scanning the weak human. Why does the Dragon Queen bow to you? Crawl's voice was like rocks grinding together. You have no claws. You have no wings. You are nothing but soft meat and fragile bones. We have decided that Earth is not worthy of an alliance. We will take your planet, and the dragons will not stop us because they only value strength. Crawl raised a heavy, glowing weapon and pointed it at Arthur's chest. The air grew cold, and the humans watching on their screens across the world held their breath. This was the ultimate test. If Arthur showed fear, the alliance might crumble. If he ran, the council would attack. Arthur didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He slowly stood up from his chair and walked toward the giant stone alien. He wasn't holding a frying pan this time, but he had something much more powerful. He had the memory of a hungry cat on his balcony. You talk about strength like it's just about how hard you can hit, Arthur said, his voice calm and steady. But you don't understand humans. We aren't strong because we can destroy things. We are strong because we choose to protect things. We took in a lost child when we had nothing. That is a power your logic will never understand. As Arthur spoke, a massive shadow fell over the balcony. A dragon landed with a roar that shook the very foundation of the city. It wasn't the queen. It was Ignis, the prince. In just 1 year, he had grown significantly. His scales were now like black diamonds, and his wingspan was wide enough to cover a house. He landed right next to Arthur, his golden eyes burning with fury. But he didn't attack. Instead, he lowered his massive, terrifying head and gently nudged Arthur's shoulder, just like he used to do when he was a small house cat. The message was clear to the entire galaxy: touch this human, and you face the wrath of the Dragon Prince. The Dragon Queen appeared shortly after, landing on the roof above them. She looked down at Crawl and the Galactic Council with a cold, sharp smile. You came here to find weakness, she said, her voice echoing across the stars. But you found the only race in the universe that can make a dragon feel at home. Humans taught us that power without kindness is just a fire that burns itself out. If you fire one shot at this planet, I will not only destroy your fleet, I will erase your names from history. The council leader, crawl, looked at the bond between the giant dragon and the small human, and for the first time in his life, he felt a fear that logic couldn't explain. He realized that humans weren't the dragon's pets, they were their heart. The silver ships of the council retreated into deep space, and they never returned to trouble Earth again. The alliance was sealed, not by a treaty, but by a friendship that spanned the stars. As the sun began to set, the Queen and the other diplomats left to attend to their duties. Arthur stayed on his balcony, looking out at the beautiful, glowing city. Ignis, the prince, let out a soft puff of blue smoke and shrunk his body down, using his magic to become the size of a large dog. He curled up at Arthur's feet, resting his head on Arthur's knee. Arthur reached down and scratched the dragon behind his horns, right in the same spot he used to scratch the cat. He pulled a small, silver tin out of his pocket and opened it. The smell of premium tuna filled the air. Even though he was a prince of a galactic empire, Ignis's eyes lit up with joy. He happily began to eat his favorite treat. Arthur smiled, looking up at the stars. He knew that humanity's journey had just begun. They weren't the strongest or the smartest, but they were the ones who gave a meal to a stranger. And in a big, scary universe, that made all the difference.